There, everybody. This is Force Weaver, your dear cleric. Welcome you all to, I guess, an April Fool's sort of Reactuber segment here. First, starting off with our first video being Max History, Cooking History with Max Miller, being the brutal life of a medieval butcher. So this is one of their more recent videos, at which I was pretty excited and skipped out on for this. So yes, without further ado, let's get started. Learning how we chopped up meat in the olden times. Hopefully not too much venison.
During the Middle Ages was a tough gig, because unlike today, when we're able to distance ourselves from the rather unpleasant goings-on that take place leading up to meat being on the table,
I suppose
medieval butchers did much of the messy and rather smelly work right in plain sight. And people didn't love it. But I guess they learned to put up with it, because that is how they got to enjoy dishes like this 1430 recipe for spiced meat and onions with a sauce of wine and saffron. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video as we take a closer look at what it was like to be a medieval butcher. This time on Tasting History.
I'm loving that little Bisharp, like that Bisharp plushie in the background. He always puts like some sort of plushie of a Pokemon in the background.
279, which was compiled in England around 1430, and the dish is called brawn en perade, and that roughly translates
like a French
to
dish.
Meat in a spice sauce. Take mighty broth of beef or of capon, and then take clean fresh meat and seethe it, but not too much. And if it be fresh meat, roast it, but not too much, and then cut it in pieces and cast it into the broth. And then take whole onions and peel them, and then take vinegar thereto and cinnamon, then take cloves, mace, and powdered pepper, and cast thereto, and a little saunders, and set it on the fire. And let boil till the onions and the meat be cooked enough, and not too much. Then take liquor made with bread and vinegar and wine, and cast thereto saffron to make the color bright, and salt, and serve it forth.
Okay, I was gonna say, nice picture of a pig there. A capon, I never heard of that one. And also, mace is originally a spice, but that does bring up the question: is the mace the spice used in mace like the pepper spray, or I guess maybe so, since it's called pepper spray, or like the deterrent.
Now, typically during this time, the term brawn referred to boar. Not always, but typically. Unfortunately, finding the right piece of boar meat today for this, something that can be simmered for a long time, is rather difficult. So I would suggest going with something like 2 pounds or 1 kilogram of beef roast or pork shoulder. Then several small onions, 1 to 2 quarts or liters of chicken or beef broth. You just want enough to cover the meat and the onions. And then a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of white wine vinegar. And the recipe says that if it is fresh meat, we should roast it a little bit. The other option would be something like smoked or salted meat, and that's what they would actually eat for much of the year. I
guess that makes sense, because they didn't have refrigerators back then, so the only way they can preserve it was salting it to high heaven.
Just goes right into the pot. But if it is fresh meat, and that's what I'm going to be using, I'm going to roast it on a spit over an open fire. Except I don't have a spit or an open fire in my house.
I was going to say.
I'm going to just grill it very quickly in a pan.
I was going to say, did you have to set that up outside or something? But no.
Then heat up the chicken or the beef broth in a pot and add the vinegar. And while it heats up, you want to peel the onions and cut off the end. And once steaming, you can add the meat and the onions. And then we're going to add the spices.
That sounds pretty
cool. It is quite a bit of spices. And here we are going to dispel a myth that I see still poking around the internet all the time. And that is that medieval people used a lot of spices in their cooking to cover up the flavor of tainted meat. And that is just ridiculous for so many reasons. First of all, as a butcher, you didn't want to be selling bad meat. It was a big no-no. It was illegal.
Well,
and you would get
I assume so, yeah.
But it did happen. However, no amount of cinnamon that you add to rotting meat is going to cover up that smell. Also, the idea that the spices were used to cover up the flavor of rotting meat would also apply then to the amount of spices that they used to flavor their pastries and their fruit. And are you assuming that all the fruit and pastry was rotten too?
Probably not.
Then there is the fact that spices were actually really expensive. They were usually kept in a cabinet under lock and key. So if you could afford a lot of spices, you could afford to get good fresh meat. Again,
want to flaunt it,
doesn't make any sense. So with that in mind, make sure you are subscribed to Tasting History. It really does help out the channel.
Yes, please be sure to check out the original video of this link
gather up
that I provided in the description
1/8
below.
teaspoon of cloves, 2 teaspoons of mace, 2 teaspoons of pepper, and 1 teaspoon of sandalwood.
Sandalwood?
Now, sandalwood, or what in the recipe they call Saunders, is not very flavorful, actually. It just...
I know that sandalwood is a very potent aromatic, usually used for scents and soaps, right? Huh, I didn't know it was an actual spice.
It adds a deep red color to the dish, so if you don't have it, it's not a big deal if you leave it out. So once the meat and the onions are simmering, add in all of those spices and stir them in. And this is really where the meat is going to get most of its flavor, so if you want to add more, feel free to do so. Then let the pot come to a gentle boil and simmer for about an hour or until the meat and the onions are nice and tender. And here, the recipe is unclear, to say the least, as so many medieval recipes are. It says that we're going to make a liquor or a sauce of wine, vinegar, and bread. The bread will help to thicken it. Then it says, cast thereto saffron to make the color bright. And we are going to do that, but what is unclear is then do I take that bright yellow sauce and add it to the rest of the cooking liquid? Because I did that, and it just diluted the color so much that it really didn't have the point in making it yellow in the first place.
Well,
so
you
maybe
can see
the
saffron.
It's hard to tell because they don't give any in any of these recipes. And I looked at other recipes from this period for this dish, and they were all just as unclear. So as I am chief master chef of this kitchen, I am making an executive decision to serve that sauce on the side. Is it right? I don't know. Might be, might not be, but it doesn't matter because that's what's about to happen. So for that,
he's going to use it as a dipping
cups,
sauce.
Or 350 milliliters of white wine, a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of white wine vinegar, or I use this honey vinegar, which is a little bit sweeter and has more of a yellow color, and they would have been able to make that. So
interesting.
Yeah, if you have honey vinegar, use that. Then a large pinch of saffron. The more saffron you use, the brighter this color is going to be, and that's the whole point of it. Then about 3/4 of a cup of breadcrumbs.
That must have cost a lot because saffron's pretty expensive, I think, right?
And a small pinch of salt. So start by adding the wine and vinegar to a small saucepan, and then add the crushed up saffron threads to it and let them steep for about 5 minutes. And this is where the color is really going to come out.
You can even see the color seeping out.
Break up the breadcrumbs and add them to the saucepan, stirring it all together, and set it over medium heat and let it come to a simmer. And stirring the whole time, let it cook for about
like raw eggs.
This will let the starch come out of the bread and will thicken the sauce. Then pass this through a strainer so it's not too gritty. We want a nice smooth sauce, and set it back over low heat and gently simmer for a few more minutes until it starts to thicken up. And it will continue to thicken up as we return not to the meat, but to the person who supplied that meat, the medieval butcher.
Yeah, butchers. History stuff is always so fascinating.
People always ask me to do a Q&A on this channel, but I don't because, I don't know, it doesn't really fit with my whole thing. So I have recently done a Q&A over on our second channel, Catch Up with Max and Jose. So I'll put a link to that in the description.
That sounds pretty fun.
I have answers. Now, it seems that the job of a butcher was not really a thing during the very early Middle Ages. At least not like a dedicated profession.
I guess everybody else would just, every household would just cut up their meats.
Move out of the home and into dedicated slaughterhouses where techniques
and cuts
were
that poor goat.
And butchering equipment became common. The 10th century is also when we start to see streets entirely named after the butchering profession, meaning that the whole street was filled with butchers. These were things like Butcher's Row, Butcher's Lane, or the Flesh Shambles. Coming from the Old English word for bench or stall, the shambles were narrow streets where butchers slaughtered and sold meat. And many cities had shambles, but the most famous is the Shambles of York, which as recently as 1885 was still home to 31 butcher shops. Today, it's mostly stores selling overpriced candles and
my friend Maureen
to tourists. Also, I've heard that the shambles were designed to be so narrow and the buildings kind of come out and almost no light can get in because having less sunlight would make it so that the meat would last longer.
I suppose so. It makes sense.
Stay nice and cool. Now, I couldn't find any actual documentation saying that, but it would absolutely make sense because keeping your meat quality was one of the most important.
We only need the most quality meat here.
In In 1266, a document outlining different laws and punishments if you broke those laws said that you would be sent to the pillory if any butcher do sell contagious flesh, or that died of the murrain, or flesh that hath been kept so long that it loseth its natural wholesomeness.
I guess so. They got a lot of pretty severe customer protection here against unsavory butchers.
To numerous plagues which
but
wiped
look
out
at that.
large amounts of cattle and sheep. So essentially,
nasty
don't sell
stuff.
sick animals. Some law codes had it so the first offense was just a fine, or if you couldn't pay the fine, then you went to jail for 20 days with bread and water.
20 days?
And on the second offense, then it was double that fine, or you went to the pillory. And on the third offense, it was doubled yet again, and the pillory with loss of one of his ears. And also shall at times after that be taken as a man infamous, not to be credited at any time in matters of judgment. Some towns would cast you out and banish you if you were caught selling bad meat. And during the Middle Ages, that was one of the worst punishments because usually it meant that you kind of had to live outside of the law in the forest, an outlaw, if you will. One specific case of selling bad meat that I enjoy comes from the Memorials of London in 1348.
Look at these people.
John Glisson of Renham and Agnes la Ismangere, the daughter of an ironmonger. They were accused of dealing in rotten meat, for they had exposed for sale in divers places in the city of London putrid and stinking meat, in deceit and to the period of the lives of persons buying the same, and to the scandal and disgrace of the mayor, aldermen, sheriffs, and all the commonalty of the city aforesaid. Well, Agnes swore that yes, she sold the meat, but only after buying it from John, and when she did so, she thought that it was good meat. And
so she was being a middleman, basically? Why would she need to do that, I guess? Maybe like a distributor.
And then John kind of fesses up and says, yeah, I sold her the bad meat. And that shortly before he sold to the said Agnes the meat aforesaid, he had found a certain dead sow thrown out near the ditch without Halegate in the suburb of London. Which sow he then flayed, and the flesh of the same, cooked as well as raw, he exposed for sale to the aforesaid Agnes, and to others who chose to buy it.
At least
Agnes was acquitted, and John was found guilty and sent to the pillory on Cornwall. And the said John should be first upon the pillory there, and the said flesh be burnt beneath him, while upon...
A 4-person pillory, Jesus. Real communal, huh?
On the pillory. Basically, the rotten meat was put under his nose and set on fire as a sort of olfactory punishment. Another punishment that I found rather interesting comes from around 1320 during the reign of Edward II, when some butchers had their beef and their pork confiscated because they had exposed the said meat for sale by candlelight. Turns out it was illegal to sell meat by candlelight or after the church bell had rung nones, the 9th hour of daylight in the day. Sometimes they were barred from even cutting meat by candlelight or in the evening because the idea was that if you could see the meat, then even if it didn't smell rotten, you might be able to see that it was starting to go off.
I guess so. That makes sense.
Light or by candlelight, well, they could maybe hide it, so then you end up buying some meat that smells okay, but is kind of gray and slimy. Of course, the meat that you're buying, you are hoping, at least, is fresh, and much of the meat was sold fresh, but even more of the meat was actually preserved by either brining or salting or smoking.
Tons of salted smoke
for months or even years in some cases.
Why is that guy taking off their shoes next to the fire? Oh my God.
Butchers did much of their work in November and December and then kind of took the winter off. The butchers of medieval Europe actually had very interesting work schedules because there were entire swaths of the year where their services were not required.
But next to the meat fire?
Very often it was actually illegal for them to work. These were the many fasting days throughout the liturgical calendar. The list of days would change throughout the years, but typically it included the 40 days of Lent plus every Friday, and at times would also include every Wednesday and every Saturday, as well as in the 12th century it included another 40-day fasting period during St. Martin's Lent, which was most of November and December. It all kind of changed on who was pope and what country you were in and everything, but no matter where you were, you had a lot of days where you couldn't eat meat, and butchers were not allowed to sell meat on those days, and in some places were not allowed to actually butcher on those days either.
Interesting.
Meaning they didn't have anything else to do. And I love that in many cities like London,
what they
the
do.
people who were in charge of making sure that the butchers didn't sell their meat were the fishmongers.
Fishmongers.
Fish was what most people were eating on those meatless days. What I really love, though, is at times people would really go out of their way to stretch the rules around eating meat.
Yeah, they do that even now today, right?
Include things as fish that were not fish. Basically, anything that came from the water was considered a fish at times, including things like beavers or aquatic birds.
Beavers?
There was even a monk who said that veal should be considered a fish because it had so recently been in the womb, which had an aquatic nature, so it's basically a fish.
Oh, that's kind of disgusting. For those who don't know, veal means basically a pretty young cow or calf. So, saying that the I don't know how the proper way to say this, but yes, those internal juices.
Really stretching it.
Yeah,
and with all these meatless days, it just meant that when a butcher could do some butchering, they really had to make the most of their time and make use of absolutely every piece of meat that they could use. The best cuts, of course, they would sell to whoever could afford it, though they had many laws about how much they could charge, and if they were found to be overcharging, then they would get in trouble with the guild. And here we have perhaps the most confusingly written medieval law I've ever come across. Please let me know if you can make sense of this.
What is this?
That butchers and all other sellers of all manner of victual shall be bound to sell the same victual for a reasonable price, having respect to the price that such victual be sold at in the places adjoining, so that the same seller have moderate gains and not excessive, reasonably to be required according to the distance of the place from when the said victual be carried. That is
what? Okay, so let me try to make sense of that. So the butcher's all the items, so yeah. Manner of victual, so I guess that means like meat and other sort of adjoining things. So at the same, for a reasonable price, yeah, but they don't say what is a reasonable price. Expected a price is such to be sold in the places adjoining, so next to it. So does it mean like the other butcheries in the row or the street? So does the same seller have moderate gains and not excessive? Reasonably be required according to the distance of the place from when the said victual be carried. So does that mean like in respect to the farm that they got the meat from?
That is what one calls a word salad. It basically just means that you can't overcharge for meat unless you have to travel with it a long ways, and then you can add a little bit, but not too much to the price.
Yeah, that's
seriously, whoever was writing that just couldn't take a second pass, maybe clean up the sentence structure a little bit. I don't know. Anyway, the reason that you might have to travel a long way with your meat is that starting around the 12th century, many cities put in laws restricting where slaughterhouses could be. Before that, or in smaller towns, the butcher would just slaughter the meat in the back room and then bring it out and sell it. But slaughtering is a dirty and rather smelly business, and so cities were like, no, you got to do it like on the outskirts of town. From there, the butcher would have to transport the 4 pieces of the cow, and sometimes it was 6, depending on the size of the cow, back to their shop. And if it was like a sheep or a pig, then it was usually the whole thing, back to their shop, wherever it was in town, and only then could they actually sell the meat. And a lot of the pieces that weren't the best cuts actually went to other places in town. Like in Paris,
restaurants?
the cut called the numbles, which is a good foot long and no more, and stretches from the neck at one end to the kidney. This section belongs rightfully to the one who
that's a
holds
camel in the back in that painting there.
He sells it in a small stand that is below the grande boucherie, and it is of little value. And there were things like the livers and lungs and stomach, or the rennet from inside the stomach that was used to make cheese, and those would be sent along to something called the tripe shop. Then there were also just bits and bobs that really nobody wanted, nobody was going to buy, and those they would call entrails. And very often, butchers were found to just kind of like toss them anywhere, including into the streams. So laws were enacted to say the entrails of butchered beasts and pails of blood are not to be carried away by day, but only by night. No pail of blood should be left uncleansed for a day and night, whether in winter or summer. No butcher nor any other person may cast entrails over Severn Bridge. No butcher may work in the city as a cook. The last part, the fact that they couldn't work in the city as a cook, was usually because if the butcher was cooking the meat to sell, it was because they were trying to hide the fact that it was about to go bad. Luckily,
makes sense, I guess.
I am not a butcher, so I am allowed to cook this meat, which I did not purchase by candlelight, and so I am pretty confident that it should be fresh. And here we are.
From like the light of the neon lights overhead.
Sauce of wine and saffron.
Oh, look at that! That's like almost
to a bowl that does not conduct heat as much as the metal, because that was hot.
It's like a neon yellow sauce. Jesus.
Some of the meat alone, and see how much spice transferred into that meat. Good amount.
Oh, a good amount, but not like an excessive amount, it seems. Thumbs up, double thumbs up.
Nice. So the flavor of the spices is there, but it's not super strong until you get a little bit of the broth, and that's actually where most of the spices are. So most of the spices didn't actually get into the meat. You do need that broth with it, but none of the spices are overpowering. It's a kind of nice complement. Usually clove can very quickly punch you in the face, but here it was a very little amount, and I think that was the right call. But really nice, very tender. I'm going to try it, though, with some of this kind of saffron sauce. Here we go.
Saffron sauce.
So.
Way better.
1, the color of that sauce, beautiful. 2, it is very medieval in its flavor because you get the saffron, but it is vinegary. And if you look at sauces throughout the Middle Ages, vinegar is always a very strong flavor. It's kind of like vinegar and sweet and spicy would often be the flavor combination.
Yes, that's what they had the most access to.
Vinegar-based barbecue sauce that you would get today. That's the idea of medieval sauces very often. The thing is, when you make a sauce using the bread as a thickener, when it starts to cool down at all, it kind of gets too thick and too grainy, and it's no longer a sauce. It really needs to be quite hot.
Okay.
Like right when you're cooking it, and after just a few minutes, it starts to kind of thicken. So, but you know, if they're bringing it all the way from the kitchens and not in the main house, no, I did that accent. It probably wouldn't have been super hot. You know, just how it is. But it's really good. Now the onion. I'm not going to just pop this whole thing in my mouth. Maybe if I had pearl onions or something.
Yeah, because that's a pretty big thing. Jesus.
But it's so soft, it just kind of like comes apart. So I'm going to try that. I love cooked onions.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't know what that head shake was.
And they are just the bee's knees. It's really wonderful. I'm curious to know like exactly what this dish was like, because the recipe is so vague and leaves so much up to interpretation that I'm unclear. So if I ever get a chance to go back in time, this probably won't be the first thing that I do. It's probably not on the list.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more interesting things you can go back in time for.
Cook in whatever fancy castle you're in. So I want to share something else with you that didn't really fit into the episode, but I thought it was really interesting, is in the Middle Ages, in the city of York, they used to put on every Feast of Corpus Christi, which is in June, they would put on these mystery plays all around town, dozens of them at the same time.
Oh, that's cool.
And mystery plays are not like Agatha Christie mysteries. They are tellings of biblical stories. And the stories, the plays would be put on by the different guilds of the town, and they would try to make it so that the guild kind of had some connection with the story. Like the Shipwrights Guild would present the story of Noah's Ark, and the Vintners Guild would perform where Jesus turned the water into wine. The ironmongers who would make nails would typically enact the story of nailing Christ to the cross, and then to depict the actual death of Christ, they would bring in the Guild of Butchers because they're butchers, and so that's who they had perform that part. I don't know. It just I thought that
hopefully they didn't actually nail them to the cross. Jesus.
Very interesting. And from what I hear, the city of York has kind of revived this tradition of doing some of these. I don't think they have, the Butcher's Guild anymore, but doing some of these mystery plays every year.
That sounds
maybe
lovely.
Not. Maybe this was a one-time thing. I'm not sure.
But yeah, hopefully, maybe.
If ever I'm in York in June, I want to go see them. And whenever I find things that are fascinating like this that really don't fit into the episode at all, I put those into the Tasting History newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that,
newsletter.
You can do that over at tastinghistory.com, a website that I put together with help from today's sponsor, Squarespace.
That's Squarespace.
Squarespace is the easiest all-in-one platform for building a website.
While they're doing the ad read, I'm going to lower it down. But yeah, that's
creating websites and design to
that's Tasting History. That was like pretty interesting to like learn about. Again, glad that he didn't include any mention of venison in there or deer. But yeah, nice to go see that. Also interesting to see that like sort of stewed sort of beef dish. And the saffron, again, that must have been pretty expensive if they had so much sprigs of saffron in there. Yes, everybody. Thank you all very much for watching this nice little reaction thing. And as I said, the original video's link is in the description, so please feel free to watch it again and give Max Miller your views. He really deserves it. He does a lot of good work. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.